Oh my goodness me, this is so overdue. Right in the middle of my sort of April to July section of the 2024 Dymocks Reading Challenge, my life just everything changed in one go, and it meant that I was a little bit behind on a few things, and filming and reading were two of them. So there was just a lot going on, and it meant that it just pushed me back. So we are going to do a reading wrap up today, and it is going to be from April to like August-ish. I think the last book I read from this challenge was, I think I finished it right at the start of September. So if we can just say, for the sake of this, we'll go April to August. It is the main course of the Dymocks Reading Challenge. So if you didn't know, I did a video in March where I did the first section of the Dymocks Reading Challenge, which they called the starter. So it's these 3 fun menu prompts. And now we are on to the main course. So I've got 10 books that I'm going to go through with you today. It's taken me long enough to get into filming this, so let's get straight to it. So the first prompt that I chose was TV Dinner, which is a book adapted for screen or featured on screen in a scene. This book is so good. The book that I chose for TV Dinner was Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton. Sometimes when he's drinking, he gets all weepy and he'll ask me to come closer to him and he'll ask me to hug him. And it feels strange to hold him close to me, but it feels good too, with his face hair rubbing like sandpaper against my softer cheeks. And it's strange and sad, the feeling of sorrow I feel, because I know he might not have actually been physically touched, except by accident, by another human for about 15 years. This book, I love Trent Dalton's writing. I read Lola in the Mirror first, and absolutely loved it, fell in love with the illustrations, fell in love with the storytelling, and was really keen to read Boy Swallows Universe. So we are following the life of a young boy called Eli Bell, and he lives in Australia. It's set in the 1980s. It explores some pretty big themes within that are kind of woven throughout the story. So there's a big focus on drug culture in Australia in the 1980s. We're also exploring some sharp themes of family, abuse, friendship, love, the kind of criminal underworld that exists, and the boys' means of survival, how they survive in such a kind of challenging, tortured world. I fell in love with these characters, with the 2 brothers. So Eli is the younger brother, Gus is his older brother, who is mute, and he does a lot of kind of writing words out with his finger into the air. And this book, for me, I remember feeling that every time I picked it up, I was being transported to this world. Like I was picking it up and reading it, and I felt immersed. Trent Dalton's writing is just so good. It's so beautiful. It's visual, it's metaphorical, it's captivating, it's immersive, it's poetic. I remember thinking that this was very cleverly written. There's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of imagery throughout it. But overall, this for me was just an absolute, it was a great way to start this part of the challenge. This was a 5-star read. I loved it. I think about it often. I then watched the series afterwards on Netflix, and I think it did do a very good job of representing the novel. There are a few bits that are different, but you can't, that's going to happen. It's a completely different art form. So Boy Swallows Universe, 5 stars. Do I do a video just on this book? I feel like I could very easily talk about this book for a good 10 minutes. So if you want to know some more about this, then let me know. Okay, our next prompt was key ingredients. So a book with food or ingredients in the title. And for this one, I read Blood Orange by Harriet Tice. She and I have both let our husbands tell us how to feel bad about ourselves, carrying all the guilt for failures that belong to them too. This was a thriller, and it's the story of a woman called Alison, and she is a lawyer. I think in the UK. I feel like this was set in the UK. And it's about the experiences that she's having in work, but also in her personal life, in her family life. Very fast paced and very twisty. When I looked at this on Goodreads, people said that they could see the twist coming. I personally, I didn't see it coming. I remember reading the last kind of few chapters and being shook to my core. But maybe it's because I wasn't looking for a twist, or I didn't know that there was a twist. I just knew it was a thriller. And look, I really, really liked this. I gave this 5 stars as well. And some of the reviews on the back are using words like complex, menacing, shocking, addictive, dark, twisty, weaves together murder, sex, and mystery. So if you are into that, then you will love this. I thought this was a good thriller, and I hadn't read a thriller for a while, so this was a good choice, I felt. So our second prompt was Blood Orange by Harriet Tice. Okay, the next prompt was Shelf Aware, which was a book that was set in or featured a bookshop. So what I chose was Better Than Fiction by Alexa Martin. There's something that grounds you when you're entrenched in nature. I don't think humans were designed to never experience fresh air and stillness. Hustle culture has somehow shifted the narrative so that we feel guilty when we rest instead of accepting the truth, which is that we need to rest to thrive. So we have our 2 main characters, Drew and Jasper. Drew has just inherited her grandmother's bookshop called the Book Nook, and she's running this bookshop, and there's a group of old ladies that have their book club there, and then they have like an author event, which is where we are introduced to Jasper. He's an author. He comes to the event in the bookshop. He's writing a new book, and it's set in Colorado, which is where this bookshop is. And then these little old ladies kind of meddle and get involved, and kind of push these two together. And they come to an agreement that if Drew lets Jasper introduce her to books and reading, then she will show him around Colorado to help him with writing his book. So it's an easy read. It's marketed as a rom-com. Now I remember thinking that the idea of the book, from what I read on the back, was really lovely, but I don't think it was executed as well as it could have been, in that it wasn't bad, it was fine. And I did find myself getting kind of page counting, seeing how much I've got left. I know I'm still kind of getting my teeth into romance, and this just didn't quite hit it for me. I like a bit of zhuzh. It lacked zhuzh for me. So this one, 3 stars. The next prompt that I went for was Long Lunch, which is a book that is longer than 500 pages. Now, I admittedly suffer with big book fear, and I have not read many books that are more than 500 pages. In fact, I think I've only read a couple. One of them being A Little Life, which I read on the Kindle because I felt that it was easier for my brain to not physically see how much of the book I had left. And I loved A Little Life. I loved it so much. And this next book, I also just absolutely love and will talk about to anyone. I feel that this book is one of those that just did something up here. It did something to my brain. So the book that I read for long lunch was Marcus Zusak's The Book Thief. So I'm going to read the back of this one for you. So, by her brother's graveside, Liesel's life is changed when she picks up an object partially hidden in the snow. It is the Gravedigger's Handbook, and it is her first act of book thievery. So begins a love affair with books and words as Liesel learns to read. Soon she is stealing books from Nazi book burnings, the mayor's wife's library, wherever there are books to be found. But these are dangerous times. When Liesel's foster family hides a Jewish fist fighter in their basement, Liesel's world is both opened up and closed down. I wanted to tell the book thief many things about beauty and brutality. But what could I tell her about those things that she didn't already know? I wanted to explain that I am constantly overestimating and underestimating the human race. That rarely do I ever simply estimate it. I wanted to ask her how the same thing could be so ugly and so glorious, and its words and stories so damning and brilliant. Now, this book was so beautifully written. The selection of words that have been crafted and put together to make this story were just exquisite and outstanding. And it takes a lot for a book to make me like emotional. And that kind of goes both ways, whether it's laughing at a book or crying at a book. It has to be very, very good for it to have that much of an emotional impact on me. But I was sobbing at parts of this book, and not just a little wiping away a tear, sobbing. I had to stop, take my glasses off, wipe my eyes, and continue. It just was so elegantly written in a way that made you just really connect with what was going on and connect with these characters and have so much empathy and sympathy for them. You kind of ride the highs and lows with them all throughout this story. And what's really unique about this book is that it is narrated from the perspective of Death. So they make Death a character. So he's watching what's happening and telling you about what's happening. And I loved that angle. I loved that perspective. Again, I feel like this is another one that I could just talk about for such a long time. Maybe this one needs its own video as well. I also gifted this to my dad. He read it so quickly and had the same reaction. He absolutely loved it and flew through it and loved the way that it was written and the storytelling. I 100% will recommend this book to anybody. So this was a 6-star read. It's a 6 stars. I couldn't fault it. It was. And again, another Australian author. So that's Trent Dalton that wrote Boy Swallows Universe, and Marcus Zusak, both Australian authors. So again, just a shining example of how excellent Australian fiction is. I don't want to let it go. Okay. I need to move on. Okay, so our next prompt was celebrating Pride because June, of course, was Pride Month, reading an LGBTQIA plus story. So the one that I went with was very rogue for me. It was a book talk book, and I haven't read many book talk books. For no reason, I just haven't. So we went with Salt Kiss by Sierra Simone. When he sees me, his eyes hood a little in a now familiar gaze, a dark and burning stare that usually precedes some humiliating command. How do you describe Salt Kiss by Sierra Simone? So this is, it's based on an old story, and I believe it's part of a trilogy. I think the best way to summarize what this is about would be bisexual, kink club, polyamory, bodyguard. I'm aware I'm not using describing words, but I feel that they are the only words that are coming to mind when I take myself back to this book. Now, if you are looking for some LGBT BDSM spice, then this is your book. You're gonna love this. I thought it was fine. I think what was missing with this one was just a bit of nuance and plot. I felt that if you really strip back what this book was about, what the plot of this book was, it's not a it's not a complex story. And that's okay. It's essentially about a man called Tristan who becomes a bodyguard for a man called Mark, and he falls in love. Mark owns a kink club. Tristan falls in love with Mark. He then gets sent to go and like collect his wife for them, I think, for them to get married, and then he falls in love with the wife as well. So there's this huge, I'd say, love triangle, but I'm not sure if it's all reciprocated. It's there's a bit of power play going on in here, I feel. So look, I gave this one a 3. It was fine. I don't know if it did enough for me to want to read the trilogy, but this was fine. Our next prompt was a palette cleanser, so something that is different to what you would usually read. I went for a classic. I'm trying to enjoy more classics. I read a couple in the last challenge, so I chose a classic. I chose Animal Farm by George Orwell. Man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk, he does not lay eggs, he is too weak to pull the plough, he cannot run fast enough to catch rabbits. Yet he is lord of all the animals. He sets them to work, he gives back to them the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving, and the rest he keeps for himself. When I tell you the rabbit hole that I ended up in after reading this, I know that some schools study this as a text. I can see why, and honestly, if I would have studied this at school, I think I'd have really enjoyed that, because I spent hours looking into Animal Farm stuff, comparing it to modern day, looking at the parallels, looking at what it was inspired by, looking at everything. So if you don't know what it's about, it's essentially a story where there are all these animals living on a farm, and the pigs decide that the animals should be in charge, and they create all these rules, and they say that they're going to do it their way because they want to be free and they don't want to be dictated by the farmer. And then we see how that starts to gradually shift as the pigs get carried away with that power. Now, this was based on the Russian Revolution of 1917. So a lot of the characters are based upon or are representations of certain historical figures. And what I found interesting with this is that, yes, it was based on something from 1917, but you're reading it and it's like something that would be happening now. I just feel that it's one of those that everyone should have read, and it's taken me too long to get to this point. Outstanding read. 5 stars, easily. Easily. Okay, next up we had Top Shelf, which is a book from the Dymocks Top 101 reading list from this year. So this is what the reading list, you can pick this up in Dymocks. And this is what it looks like. So I've highlighted the ones that I've got, and then I tick them when I've read them. So for this one, we have The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Every life contains many millions of decisions, some big, some small. But every time one decision is taken over another, the outcomes differ. An irreversible variation occurs, which in turn leads to further variations. Matt Haig has a very special place in my heart. His writing helped me write at a time when I needed it to. His book Reasons to Stay Alive was a key text, a key book for me that I just found like a little blanket right when I needed it. And similarly with, where is it? The Comfort Book. That I read that during lockdown, and it was, again, I just read it at a time when I needed it. I loved this book. This was lovely. So it's a magical realism book that explores mental health, and it's basically about this space between life and death where a library exists. And each book in the library is a version of your life that you could have lived. And we follow our main character, Nora, as she has all of those experiences and sees what life could have been like should she had made other decisions, some of them big, some of them small. But I just found that I didn't realize how much I really enjoyed magical realism. And this book for me kind of confirmed that. I really loved being transported back in time. I loved the idea of this magical space that exists between life and death. Our top shelf read was The Midnight Library, and this one was 4 stars for me. Okay, we have 3 prompts left. So the next book that I read, well, actually, I read this one kind of alongside other ones that I was reading at the time because I have read it before. This one was a comfort meal. So a past book that fills you with nostalgia and warmth and all that fuzzy good stuff. So for me, this was an absolute no-brainer what I was going to choose for this one. I read Matilda by Roald Dahl. Matilda's eyes were also riveted on the glass. And now, quite slowly, there began to creep over Matilda a most extraordinary and peculiar feeling. The feeling was mostly in the eyes. A kind of electricity seemed to be gathering inside them. A sense of power was brewing in those eyes of hers. Now, I'm assuming most people will know the story of Matilda, but if you don't, I guess a quick summary of what this is about. Matilda is a little girl with awful parents and an awful head teacher at her school. And Matilda discovers one day that she has powers. She can move things with her eyes, and she uses that to kind of try and put her world to rights. We have beautiful characters like Miss Honey, who is a teacher. I think we all wanted a teacher like Miss Honey when we were at school. The great thing with Roald Dahl books is how playful the language is. He would make words up, he would put words big on the page, he would use rhyme, he would use the formatting to make it really playful and really enjoyable. And I think that's the great thing about a Roald Dahl story, is that it's that little entrance into reading, but because it's laid out so in such a fun way with illustrations and playing around with the text. Look at her. It makes it exciting, it makes it enjoyable. So I chose this because when I really think back to when I first really just fell in love with reading and enjoyed reading, my memory takes me back to when I would sit with my dad in his armchair and I would sit and read him a Roald Dahl story, whether it was The Twits, George's Marvelous Medicine, or Matilda. And the thing I loved about Matilda was that I wanted to be like her. We both had brown hair, we both had a fringe, we both loved books. She has magical powers. And I think just going back to the space of reading a book that is an easy read, it's a children's book, but it felt comforting and it was enjoyable, and it takes you back to that place of nostalgia and that place of simplicity, where reading was just so joyful. And it's nice to remember where that love of reading that I have now, where that came from. Highly recommend. thinking about a book that you read when you were a child and rereading it. Read it now. I guarantee you will have a lovely time. So, of course, for me, this was a 5-star book. It was always going to be a 5-star book, and I had a lovely time delving back into the world of Roald Dahl. Our next prompt was called Yes Chef, and it was a book recommendation from a friend or someone in your life that you think has the best literary taste. Now, I have many amazing people in my life that have given me and shared with me amazing books and stories. It was hard to think who I was going to ask, but in the end, I asked my mum because she is an avid reader. She reads a lot. We used to read a lot together. We used to have very similar tastes. So I asked my mum for a recommendation, and she recommended me We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. None of us are any one thing. We're just a collection of the best and worst things we've done. So this was a crime story, which is very different to what I usually read. I have read quite a lot of thrillers or dark stories, but never really crime or like detectives or anything like that. So we're following our character called Duchess, and she's been through a lot. She's witnessed things no one should have to witness, and the book basically is following that, but it's also following this detective called, what was his name? What on earth was his name? Walker. It might have been his last name, but everyone called him Walk, which bothered me. Anyway, I digress. So we've got Duchess. Star is her mother. Walk is the detective. And it's all about the things that Duchess has witnessed and experienced and her life kind of as an outlaw. She always says that she's an outlaw. She has a little brother. It's all set in California. There's also a character called Vincent King who has just been released from prison. Now, I felt so bad. I felt so bad after I read this because I didn't like it. And I know that's got nothing to do with my relationship with my mother, just because she recommended it and I didn't like it. But I really didn't like this book. And she did. And that's the great thing about books, right? I've recommended books to her before and she's been like, absolutely not. So, with this one, I think my main problem was I just didn't know what was going on half the time. I was confused. I didn't know what people were talking about. I wasn't following. Like, if I think back, I could probably tell you a general kind of plot, which I just did, but I couldn't give you much more detail than that. That was my biggest problem, was that I didn't know what was going on and I was bored. And it was probably about 100 pages longer than it needed to be. I think if it was shorter, I can't go into that territory. If it was shorter, if it had a different plot, if it had different characters, if it was clearer, that'll be a different book. That's not this book. So, look, for me, this one was a 2-star read, but that's okay. You can't win them all. We've had how many 5 stars in this video? A lot of 5 stars. So we would do a 2. All right, our last one was a First Nations story. So an author that is First Nations or Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And I am so excited to talk about this book because we're ending on a high. After the 2-star, we're ending on a high. The book is called Love Unleashed and it is by Melanie Saywood. I look around our little circle at the girl I'm dating and my New York best friend. I am far, far from home, but I feel the protective gaze of Mum and our ancestors circling us, and my body thrums with the understanding I'm in the right place and time. Where do I start with this book? My God, I loved this book. I loved this. So I need to tell you what it was. I need to tell you what it was about. So it follows our main character Bryn, who is a Bigumble woman who lives in Brisbane, and she has a dream of going to New York to work in publishing. When she gets there, she has to have a job. She has to pick up work. So she gets a job at a doggy daycare. Hence this, look at this, New York skyline, doggies, beautiful. And we just get to see life through her eyes. We get to see her making friends, getting into relationships, meeting new people, making mistakes. When I say that this book has everything, I mean, this book truly just does have everything. We've got female First Nations main character. We've got New York backdrop. We've got dogs. We've got bisexuality. We've got female friendships. There is nothing that this book did wrong. And it was a feel-good book. It was a great time. I was sad when it was finished. And I am so pleased that I read this for this prompt and to finish off this challenge, because it was just wonderful. And I would like her to release some more, please. It was fun, there was romance, there was career goals, there was friendship dramas, there was burlesque, there was just everything. All the things were in this book, and it's what, packed into 305 pages of just beautiful. So absolute 5 out of 5 for Love Unleashed, and I will not stop recommending this to everyone. So that's our 10. That's all our books for this for the April to August challenge. I hope there were some books in there that have been on your TBR that you are now going to go and pick up and start and read. The reason I love doing videos like this is because I love to watch other people do videos like this, because I find new books that I'm interested in. So I am currently in the midst of the final part of the challenge. I am playing catch up from being behind on the last section, but there will be one more of these videos to wrap up my Dymocks reading challenge. I might even do a video of kind of all of them. Maybe we could do a ranking or something where we can talk about all of the great books that I wouldn't have discovered if I didn't start this challenge. So I hope you loved this. Thank you so much for clicking and watching, and hopefully there are some new reads for you in there, and I will see you very, very soon in the next one. Bye!